The third morning brought an unexpected discovery. Marcus wheeled into the kitchen to find Grace rearranging the breakfast room furniture. She had moved his usual chair aside and was adjusting the height of the table. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious rather than alarmed. "Experimenting," Grace replied, testing the table height with her hands. "I've been watching you eat, and it seems like you're always reaching up or leaning forward. Thought we might try making the furniture work better for you instead of the other way around." No one had ever suggested modifying the house to accommodate Marcus's needs. The family had purchased his wheelchair and medical equipment, but the assumption had always been that he should adapt to his environment, not that the environment might change for him. "My mother likes the breakfast room set up a certain way," Marcus said carefully. "Well, we can always change it back if this doesn't work better. But seems to me that comfort matters more than decoration when you're trying to enjoy a meal." Grace's logic was so simple that Marcus wondered why no one had thought of it before. When she finished adjusting the table, his plate sat at the perfect height. His arms rested naturally on the surface, and he could reach everything without strain. "Better?" Grace asked. Marcus nodded, surprised by how much difference the small change made. "Much better." As he ate, Grace worked around the kitchen, but she kept up a steady conversation that felt more like talking with a friend than being served by household staff. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Grace said, wiping down the counter. "You've got this whole big house, but you spend most of your time in just a few rooms. Seems like a waste of good space." "I can't really get around everywhere easily," Marcus explained. "Some of the rooms have steps and the rugs are too thick for my wheels." Grace sounded thoughtful rather than sympathetic. "What if we figured out ways around those problems?" The idea was revolutionary. Marcus had accepted the limitations of his physical environment the same way he had accepted his medical condition, as unchangeable facts that defined the boundaries of his world. "My parents wouldn't want me changing things in the house," and he said. "Who said anything about changing things permanently? I'm talking about problem solving, making what's already here work better." After breakfast, Grace surprised Marcus by asking if he wanted to give her a tour of the house. No one had ever requested his perspective on the family home before. They started with the main floor where Marcus could move freely. Grace asked practical questions about which routes worked best for his wheelchair and where he felt most comfortable. When they reached the formal living room, which Marcus rarely used, Grace studied the furniture arrangement with the focused attention of an engineer examining a blueprint. "This room has beautiful light," she observed. "Shame you can't enjoy it more often. The carpet is too thick and there are steps down into the seating area." Grace walked around the room, measuring distances with her eyes. "What if we rolled back this section of carpet? Just temporarily, to see if the hardwood underneath works better for your wheels?" Marcus felt a flutter of excitement mixed with anxiety. "My mother loves that carpet. It's Persian, and it cost more than most people's cars. Carpets can be rolled up and unrolled. They're made to be moved." The simple confidence in Grace's voice made the impossible seem reasonable. She wasn't suggesting they damage anything or permanently alter his mother's carefully designed spaces. She was proposing temporary experiments to expand Marcus's world. "Would you really help me try that?" "I would, but only if you want to. This is your house too, Marcus. You should be able to enjoy all of it." They spent the next hour exploring spaces Marcus hadn't visited in months. Grace identified simple solutions to obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. A wooden board could create a ramp over the small step into the library's reading nook. Moving a heavy chair would clear a path to the window seat in the music room. Reorganizing books on lower shelves would make the best volumes accessible. "The thing is," Grace explained as they surveyed the music room, "most barriers aren't actually permanent. They just look that way when you're used to seeing them every day." When Diana Morrison returned from her morning errands, she found Marcus in the formal living room for the first time in over a year. Grace had indeed rolled back a section of the Persian carpet, revealing the polished hardwood floor underneath. Marcus was positioned near the large windows, reading in the natural light. "What's going on here?" Diana asked, her voice tight with surprise. "We're doing some experimenting, Mrs. Morrison," Grace said calmly. "Seeing if we can make more of the house comfortable for Marcus. I don't remember authorizing any changes to the furniture arrangement." Marcus felt the familiar tension that arose whenever his needs conflicted with his mother's preferences. But Grace stepped forward with the same quiet confidence she had shown all week. "You're absolutely right, and I should have asked first. I got excited about giving Marcus more options and forgot my manners. We can put everything back exactly the way it was. Diana looked at her son, sitting comfortably in natural light for the first time in months, then at the carefully rolled carpet that remained undamaged. "How do you feel about this, Marcus?" she asked. The question surprised him. His mother rarely asked for his opinion about household decisions. "I like being able to use this room," he said honestly. "The light is really good for reading and I can see the garden from here." Diana was quiet for a long moment, studying the scene. Marcus held his breath, waiting for her to insist that everything be returned to its original state. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose we could try it for a few days. See how it works." As his mother left the room, Marcus looked at Grace with amazement. Somehow, she had advocated for his needs without creating conflict or making his mother feel criticized. "How did you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Get her to agree. Usually when I ask for changes, it becomes a big discussion about maintaining the house properly." Grace smiled. "I think your mother wants you to be happy, Marcus. Sometimes parents just need permission to change the rules they've created for themselves." That afternoon, Marcus explored his own house with fresh eyes, seeing possibilities instead of limitations for the first time in his life. By the end of Grace's first week, the Morrison household had settled into new rhythms that no one could have predicted. Marcus found himself waking earlier, eager to start days that had become unpredictable and interesting. Grace had quietly revolutionized his daily routine without making it feel like therapy or treatment. The most significant change happened during his physical therapy sessions. Grace had asked Dr. Reynolds if she could observe one of the appointments, claiming she wanted to understand Marcus's needs better for household planning purposes. What she actually did was watch with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Those exercises look pretty repetitive," Grace commented to Marcus after the therapist left. "Do you ever get to choose what you work on?" "Dr. Reynolds designs my program. I just follow it." What if we thought about it differently? Instead of just exercising your legs, what if we focused on making your whole body stronger? Grace's approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Rather than treating Marcus's legs as broken parts that needed fixing, she began incorporating movement into everyday activities around the house. When they rearranged furniture to improve his access, she suggested he help push and pull items, building upper body strength. When she prepared meals, she invited him to knead dough and chop vegetables, exercises that improved his coordination and grip strength. Strength comes from doing real things, not just from machines, Grace explained as Marcus helped her fold laundry. "Your body wants to be useful. We just need to find ways to let it." The changes were subtle but noticeable. Marcus's posture improved as his core muscles strengthened from more active participation in household tasks. His hands became steadier from practical activities that engaged his fine motor skills. Most importantly, he began to see his body as capable rather than defective. Diana Morrison watched these developments with a mixture of approval and concern. She appreciated that Marcus seemed happier and more engaged, but she worried that Grace was overstepping boundaries between staff and family. "Richard, I think we need to discuss Grace's role in Marcus's care," Diana said during one of their private conversations. "She's wonderful with him, but she's not a medical professional." "What exactly is she doing wrong?" Richard asked, looking up from his newspaper. "It's not that she's doing anything wrong. It's just that she seems to have her own ideas about what's best for Marcus." Richard considered this. He had noticed his son's improved mood and increased activity level. For the first time in years, Marcus was initiating conversations at dinner and showing interest in topics beyond his schoolwork. "Maybe that's not entirely bad," Richard said carefully. "Dr. Reynolds hasn't made much progress with traditional therapy. Perhaps a different perspective could be helpful." The conversation was interrupted by laughter from the kitchen. Through the doorway, they could see Marcus and Grace working together to prepare dinner. Marcus was mixing something in a large bowl while Grace guided his technique. Both were laughing at some shared joke. "When's the last time we heard him laugh like that?" Richard asked quietly. Diana had no answer. She realized that in her focus on providing Marcus with the best medical care and educational opportunities, she had somehow overlooked the importance of simple joy in his daily life. That evening, Grace made an unexpected request. She asked if she could speak privately with both parents after Marcus went to bed. "I hope I haven't overstepped my role here," Grace began when they gathered in the living room. "But I've been thinking about Marcus's situation. and I'd like to share some observations. Diana tensed, expecting criticism of their parenting or medical decisions. That boy is capable of much more than anyone realizes, Grace continued. He's got strength and intelligence and determination. But he's been told so often what he can't do that he's stopped thinking about what he might be able to do. The doctors have been very clear about his limitations, Diana said defensively. I'm not questioning the doctors, Grace replied gently. I'm just suggesting that limitations and possibilities aren't the same thing. Marcus has been living inside a very small version of his actual life. Richard leaned forward with interest. What do you mean? I mean that he spent so much time focusing on walking that he hasn't learned to run, metaphorically speaking. Grace pulled out a small notebook where she had been recording her observations. In the past week, Marcus has shown that he can build upper body strength, improve his coordination, and solve practical problems. He's got good judgment and better social skills than he thinks, but most importantly, he's got spirit that's been buried under too much careful protection. Diana felt a pang of recognition. In their efforts to keep Marcus safe and provide him with excellent care, had they accidentally limited his growth in other areas? What are you suggesting? She asked. I'm suggesting that Marcus is ready for more independence and more challenges. Real ones, not just physical therapy exercises. Grace opened her notebook and showed them her ideas. She had researched adaptive sports programs, identified educational opportunities outside the house, and found social groups for teenagers with disabilities. Her notes revealed weeks of careful planning and genuine investment in Marcus's future. You've put a lot of thought into this, Richard observed. Marcus is an exceptional young man. He deserves an exceptional life, not just exceptional medical care. Diana looked at the detailed plans Grace had developed. She saw volunteer opportunities, educational experiences, and social activities that could expand Marcus's world far beyond their carefully protected home environment. These programs, Diana said. Studying the list, wouldn't they be risky? What if Marcus gets hurt, or what if he can't keep up? Mrs. Morrison, Grace said gently. What if he can? The question hung in the air between them. Diana realized that her fear of Marcus failing had prevented her from giving him opportunities to succeed. Could you help us research these options more thoroughly? Richard asked. I'd like to understand what might be possible. As Grace gathered her notebook and prepared to leave, Marcus appeared in the doorway. He had been reading in his room but had come downstairs for a glass of water. Are you talking about me? He asked with the directness that had become characteristic of his interactions with Grace. The three adults exchanged glances. Diana's instinct was to protect Marcus from adult conversations about his care, but Grace spoke first. We were talking about some opportunities that might interest you. Things happening outside the house. Marcus's eyes lit up with curiosity and hope. For the first time, his parents saw their son not as a patient to be managed, but as a young man ready to engage with the wider world. Grace Washington arrived at 7:30 the next morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the same confident smile that had surprised Marcus the day before. Diana Morrison was still in her silk robe when she answered the door, clearly not expecting the new housekeeper to begin work so early. I like to get started before the house wakes up, Grace explained simply. Gives me time to understand the rhythm of a place. Within an hour, Grace had transformed the kitchen. She moved with purpose and efficiency, but without the nervous energy that had characterized the previous temporary workers. When Marcus wheeled into the breakfast room at 8:30, he found his usual morning routine completely changed. Instead of the formal place setting his mother preferred, Grace had arranged his breakfast more casually. Fresh orange juice sat beside perfectly scrambled eggs, and the morning newspaper was folded open to the sports section, rather than the business pages his father always left for him. Thought you might enjoy reading about something other than stock prices, Grace said, refilling his juice glass. You strike me as someone who has opinions about more than just homework. Marcus stared at the newspaper, then at Grace. No one had ever asked him what he wanted to read, or suggested that his interests might extend beyond his prescribed studies. I do like basketball, he admitted quietly. Chicago Bulls fan? Lakers, actually. My dad thinks basketball is a waste of time. Grace nodded thoughtfully. Parents sometimes forget that being smart doesn't mean you can't also enjoy watching talented people do amazing things with their bodies. The comment hung in the air for a moment. Marcus realized that Grace had just acknowledged his physical limitations without making them the focus of the conversation. She had spoken about athletic ability as something to admire, not something that defined who could or couldn't participate in life. "Have you always lived in Chicago?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with the question. "Born and raised in Mississippi, actually. Came north about 15 years ago for work. Still miss the slower pace sometimes, but this city grows on you." As the morning progressed, Marcus found himself lingering in common areas of the house instead of retreating to his room. Grace worked around him naturally, neither avoiding him nor making a show of including him. When she dusted the library, she asked about the books he was reading. When she organized the game room, she inquired whether he preferred chess or checkers. The most remarkable thing was how she handled his wheelchair. Previous housekeepers had either ignored it completely or treated it like medical equipment that required special consideration. Grace simply accepted it as part of how Marcus moved through the world. When she needed to clean around his desk, she asked him to move the same way she might ask anyone to step aside. "Your chair has good wheels," she commented while vacuuming the library carpet. "Bet it turns on a dime." "It's pretty responsive," Marcus agreed, demonstrating with a quick spin that made Grace laugh. "Show off," she teased. But her tone was warm and approving. By lunchtime, Diana Morrison had noticed the change in atmosphere. She found Marcus in the kitchen, actually talking to Grace about a book he was reading instead of eating alone in the breakfast room as usual. "Marcus, dear, you shouldn't bother Grace while she's working," his mother said, her voice carrying the polite correction she used when company was present. "He's not bothering me at all, Mrs. Morrison," Grace replied evenly. "I enjoy hearing about what young people are thinking about these days." Diana looked between them with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. His mother valued efficiency and proper boundaries between family and staff. The easy conversation she had witnessed seemed to challenge both priorities. "Well, Marcus has physical therapy at 2 o'clock. He'll need to be ready." After his mother left, Grace continued preparing lunch without commenting on the interruption. Marcus watched her work, noticing how she had managed to defend their conversation without directly contradicting his mother's wishes. "Your therapist seems nice," Grace said eventually. "Dr. Reynolds is okay. The exercises don't really help much, but everyone says I should keep trying." Grace paused in her chopping of vegetables. "What do you think about that?" The question caught Marcus completely off guard. No one had ever asked for his opinion about his own medical treatment. Doctors made recommendations, parents made decisions, and Marcus followed instructions. "I think maybe there are different ways to get stronger," he said slowly, the thought forming as he spoke it. "That sounds wise to me." When Dr. Reynolds arrived for the afternoon session, Grace was in the next room folding laundry. Marcus went through his usual exercises, leg lifts, resistance training, and stretching routines that had produced no measurable improvement in 2 years of consistent effort. Halfway through the session, he heard Grace humming in the hallway. It was a low rhythmic melody that seemed to match the tempo of his exercises. Without consciously deciding to do so, Marcus found himself working slightly harder, holding each position a few seconds longer than usual. "Good effort today," Dr. Reynolds commented as they finished. "Whatever's motivating you, keep it up." After the therapist left, Grace appeared in the doorway of the exercise room. "How did that go?" "Better than usual, actually." Sometimes a change in routine helps everything else feel different too. That evening, Marcus stayed downstairs for dinner instead of taking his meal in his room as he often did. His parents discussed their day while Grace served the meal she had prepared: roasted chicken with herbs, vegetables that actually tasted good, and bread that was still warm from the oven. "This is excellent, Grace," Richard Morrison said, and Marcus heard genuine appreciation in his father's voice for the first time in weeks. As Grace cleared the table, she paused beside Marcus's chair. "Sleep well tonight. Tomorrow's a new day." Something in her tone suggested that tomorrow might offer possibilities that today had only hinted at. For the first time since he could remember, Marcus found himself genuinely curious about what the next day might bring. The grand mansion stood like a fortress on Hillcrest Avenue, its marble columns reaching toward the sky like white sentinels. Behind those towering walls lived the Morrison family, whose wealth could buy anything money could touch. Yet inside the most expensive room of that house, 16-year-old Marcus Morrison sat in his wheelchair, staring out at a world he had never truly experienced on his own 2 feet. Marcus had been born with a rare condition that left his legs unable to support his weight. The doctors called it a muscular disorder, but to Marcus it was simply the bars of an invisible prison. His father, Richard Morrison, owned 3 successful companies and could afford the best medical care in the country. Specialists from around the world had examined Marcus, prescribing treatments, surgeries, and therapies that cost more than most people's homes. Nothing worked. The boy's days followed the same pattern. His private tutor would arrive at 9 in the morning to teach him in the library. By noon, a physical therapist would work with his legs, moving them through exercises that Marcus barely felt. Afternoons were spent reading or playing video games while his mother, Diana, attended charity events and social gatherings. She loved Marcus deeply, but often seemed uncomfortable around his wheelchair, as if it reminded her of something she preferred to forget. The Morrison household employed 7 staff members, but they treated Marcus like expensive china, careful, distant, and always worried about doing something wrong. The previous housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson, had worked for the family for 3 years. She was efficient and professional, but she spoke to Marcus the way adults speak to children in museums, quietly and carefully, as if he might break. Mrs. Thompson had recently left to care for her sick mother, and the agency had been sending replacements for 2 weeks. None lasted more than a few days. Some found the work too demanding, others seemed intimidated by the family's wealth, and a few simply disappeared without explanation. Diana Morrison was growing frustrated with the endless parade of temporary help. Marcus had stopped paying attention to the new faces that came and went. They all looked at him with the same expression, a mixture of pity and discomfort that made him want to retreat to his room. He had learned to read people quickly, and most saw only his wheelchair, not him. On a gray Tuesday morning in November, Marcus was in the library working on a history assignment when he heard voices in the hallway. His mother was speaking to someone in her usual crisp tone, explaining the household rules and expectations. He had heard this conversation so many times that he could recite it from memory. The responding voice was different, though. It was warm and confident, with a slight southern accent that reminded Marcus of summer evenings and front porch conversations. The woman asked practical questions about cleaning supplies and laundry procedures, but she also asked something no other candidate had inquired about. She wanted to know about Marcus's daily routine and what made him comfortable. When his mother brought the woman to meet him, Marcus looked up from his textbook to see someone completely unexpected. She was a black woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and hands that looked like they had worked hard but remained gentle. Unlike the others, she walked directly to his desk and extended her hand. "Hello, Marcus. I'm Grace Washington. Your mother tells me you're quite the scholar." Her handshake was firm and natural, as if greeting any 16-year-old she might meet. What struck Marcus most was how she looked at him. Not at his wheelchair, not with pity or awkward sympathy, but directly into his eyes as if she was genuinely interested in what she might find there. For a moment he forgot to respond, caught off guard by being treated like a regular person. "Nice to meet you," he finally managed, his voice cracking slightly from surprise. Grace smiled and glanced at his textbook. "World War II? That's fascinating history. My grandfather used to tell me stories about those times. He served in the Pacific Theater." Before Marcus could respond, his mother cleared her throat. Marcus needs to focus on his studies. "Grace, let me show you the rest of the house." As they left the library, Marcus found himself listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway. Something about Grace Washington felt different from the start, though he couldn't quite identify what it was. She had spoken to him like he was a person, not a problem to be managed or a tragedy to be pitied. The house fell quiet again, but for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt curious about tomorrow. He wondered if Grace would get the job and, more importantly, if she would stay longer than the others. Most of the temporary housekeepers avoided him after their initial introduction, completing their work around him as if he were furniture that needed to be dusted around. That evening at dinner, his parents discussed Grace's qualifications. She had excellent references from her previous positions and experience managing large households. What his mother didn't mention, but Marcus had noticed, was that Grace had asked about him as if his thoughts and preferences mattered. As Marcus went to bed that night, he realized he was actually looking forward to seeing if Grace would return the next morning. For months, each new day had felt exactly like the last, but something in Grace's direct gaze and easy, Confidence suggested that might be about to change. The Morrison mansion had always felt like a beautiful museum where Marcus was the most valuable and fragile exhibit. Perhaps Grace Washington would see something different when she looked at their carefully controlled world. The transformation that followed was gradual but unmistakable. Grace had planted seeds of possibility that began growing in every corner of Marcus's life. Within 2 weeks, the Morrison family had visited 3 different programs, designed for teenagers with physical challenges. The first was an adaptive sports center where Marcus watched wheelchair basketball players move across the court, with speed and agility that amazed him. He had never imagined that wheelchairs could be tools for athletics rather than simply medical equipment. "Could I try that?" Marcus asked Grace as they observed a practice session. "I don't see why not. Want to ask the coach?" The conversation with Coach Martinez changed everything. Instead of focusing on what Marcus couldn't do, the coach evaluated what he could do. Marcus's upper body strength, developed through Grace's practical activities, was already above average. His coordination had improved significantly from weeks of real-world tasks. "We have a beginners group that meets twice a week," Coach Martinez explained. "No experience necessary, just willingness to learn." Diana Morrison watched her son's face transform as he listened to the coach describe training schedules and team goals. She saw an enthusiasm there that had been missing from his physical therapy sessions. "What do you think, Mom?" Marcus asked, and Diana realized he was asking for permission to hope. "I think we should try it," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. The second program was an academic enrichment center that offered advanced courses for gifted students. Marcus's isolation at home had actually allowed him to advance beyond typical grade-level work, and his standardized test scores suggested exceptional academic ability. Dr. Sarah Chen, the program director, interviewed Marcus with the same thorough attention she gave to all potential students. She asked about his interests, his goals, and his learning style. Never once did she mention his wheelchair or ask about his medical condition. "Marcus demonstrates exceptional analytical thinking," Dr. Chen told his parents after the interview. "Our advanced philosophy and ethics course would challenge him in ways that typical high school curriculum cannot." Richard Morrison felt a surge of pride as he listened to Dr. Chen describe his son's intellectual capabilities. Somehow, in their focus on Marcus's physical limitations, they had failed to fully appreciate his academic gifts. The third program was the most ambitious. Grace had discovered a volunteer organization that trained teenagers to tutor younger children with learning disabilities. The program required a significant time commitment and genuine responsibility. "Why did you think of this one?" Diana asked Grace as they drove to the orientation meeting. "Because Marcus has spent years learning how to overcome challenges," Grace replied. "That experience could help other kids who are struggling with their own problems." At the orientation, Marcus met other teenage volunteers who came from various backgrounds and circumstances. Some were honor students seeking service hours. Others were young people who had overcome their own academic struggles. What they shared was a desire to make a difference in younger children's lives. Marcus found himself partnered with 8-year-old Jenny, a bright girl who struggled with reading due to dyslexia. During their first tutoring session, Marcus discovered that his patience and understanding, developed through years of his own challenges, made him naturally effective at helping Jenny work through difficult texts. "You don't give up easy," Jenny observed after Marcus had helped her decode a particularly challenging paragraph. "Neither do you," Marcus replied, and he meant it. The combination of these 3 programs created a schedule that challenged Marcus physically, intellectually, and emotionally. Basketball practice twice a week built his strength and coordination while teaching him teamwork. The advanced academic course stretched his mind and connected him with intellectual peers. Tutoring sessions gave him purpose and helped him recognize his own growth. Grace watched these developments with quiet satisfaction, but her most important intervention was yet to come. She had been observing Marcus's progress carefully, and she believed he was ready for something unprecedented. "Marcus," Grace said one afternoon as they prepared dinner together, "I've been thinking about your basketball training. What about it?" Coach Martinez mentioned that some of his players also work on standing exercises. Not for walking necessarily, but for developing different muscle groups and improving overall stability. Marcus paused in his chopping of vegetables. "Dr. Reynolds has tried standing exercises with me for years. They never lead anywhere. Maybe the difference is motivation." When you're training for basketball, standing work becomes part of athletic preparation, not medical treatment. The distinction was subtle but significant. Grace was suggesting that Marcus approach standing exercises as an athlete rather than as a patient. Would you be willing to try some standing work with me? Not as therapy, but as training? Marcus considered the proposal. Grace had never suggested anything that didn't work, and her approach had consistently produced better results than traditional methods. What would we do differently? We'd focus on functional strength rather than just standing for its own sake. Building the muscles you need to transfer in and out of your chair more easily, to reach higher shelves, to have more options. That evening, Grace spoke privately with Dr. Reynolds about incorporating standing exercises into Marcus's basketball training routine. The therapist was intrigued by the idea of approaching the work from an athletic rather than medical perspective. His motivation is certainly higher than I've ever seen it, Dr. Reynolds admitted, and his overall strength has improved dramatically. It might be worth exploring. When Grace proposed the modified training program to Marcus's parents, she framed it carefully. This isn't about walking, she explained. This is about maximizing Marcus's athletic potential and functional independence. Whether or not it leads to walking is beside the point. Diana felt the familiar anxiety that arose whenever anyone suggested changes to Marcus's care routine, but she also saw the confidence and joy that had emerged in her son over the past month. What does Marcus think about this? She asked. He's interested, but he wants to make sure you and Mr. Morrison are comfortable with the idea. Richard and Diana exchanged glances. Their son was asking for their permission to pursue greater independence and strength. How could they refuse? Let's try it, Richard said. But we go slowly, and we stop if anything doesn't feel right. As Grace prepared for the next phase of Marcus's development, she knew that they were approaching a crucial moment. Everything they had built together, the confidence, the strength, the expanded worldview, would be tested in the challenges ahead. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon in December, almost 6 weeks after Grace had first walked into the Morrison household. Marcus was working with Dr. Reynolds on standing exercises, but this time Grace was present to help frame the work as athletic training rather than medical therapy. Think about this as building the strength you need for better chair transfers, Grace suggested as Marcus gripped the parallel bars. Basketball players need to move in and out of their chairs quickly during substitutions. Marcus nodded, focusing on the practical application rather than the medical goals. He had been working on these same exercises for years, but something felt different today. His core was stronger from weeks of real-world activities. His arms were more muscular from basketball training, and his confidence had grown from success in multiple areas of his life. Hold that position for 10 seconds, Dr. Reynolds instructed. Marcus gripped the bars and shifted his weight to his legs. The sensation was familiar but somehow more stable than usual. He had performed this exercise hundreds of times before, but today his legs felt more responsive, more connected to his intentions. Good, Dr. Reynolds said. Now try to shift your weight slightly forward. As Marcus adjusted his position, something extraordinary happened. For just a moment, he felt his legs supporting his weight independently. Not completely, but more than they ever had before. Did you feel that? Grace asked, her voice carefully controlled. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He had felt his legs engage in a way that was entirely new. Let's try that again, Dr. Reynolds said, his professional excitement carefully measured. Over the next 30 minutes, Marcus repeated the exercise multiple times. Each attempt produced the same result, a moment of weight-bearing stability that exceeded anything he had experienced in years of therapy. When the session ended, Dr. Reynolds documented the results with unusual thoroughness. He had seen incremental improvements in patients before, but this represented a qualitative change rather than just gradual progress. I'd like to adjust your training program, Dr. Reynolds told Marcus. Based on what we saw today, I think we can push these exercises further. That evening, Marcus could barely contain his excitement during dinner. He described the day's breakthrough to his parents, his words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to share the experience. It felt like my legs remembered something they had forgotten, he explained. Like the connection was always there, but I just couldn't access it before. Diana Morrison listened to her son's animated description with a mixture of hope and caution. She had learned to be skeptical of breakthroughs that might not lead to lasting change. What does Dr. Reynolds think? She asked. He wants to increase the frequency of standing work and add some new exercises. He thinks the basketball training has improved my overall conditioning enough to make more intensive work possible. Richard Morrison studied his son's face, noting the confidence and determination that had replaced the resigned acceptance of previous years. "And how do you feel about that?" Richard asked. "I want to try everything." Grace says that progress comes from taking calculated risks, not from playing it safe. After dinner, Grace and Marcus worked together in the kitchen, as had become their routine. But tonight, Marcus insisted on standing at the counter to help with dishes rather than remaining in his wheelchair. "Are you sure?" Grace asked. "We don't want to overdo it after such a big day." "I want to see how long I can stand while doing something normal," Marcus replied. "Not as an exercise, but as part of regular life." Grace positioned herself nearby as Marcus gripped the edge of the counter and shifted his weight to his legs. With the counter providing support, he was able to stand for nearly 5 minutes while helping to dry dishes. "This is amazing," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. "I can reach things I've never been able to reach. I can see over the counter to the stove." Grace watched Marcus experience the simple pleasure of a different physical perspective. After years of viewing the world from wheelchair height, standing offered him a literally new outlook on familiar spaces. "How do your legs feel?" she asked, tired but not painful, like they've been working instead of just going through motions. Over the following weeks, Marcus's progress accelerated dramatically. The combination of athletic training, functional exercises, and increased confidence created a positive feedback loop that surprised everyone, including Dr. Reynolds. Marcus began standing for longer periods during everyday activities. He could transfer in and out of his wheelchair with greater ease and independence. Most remarkably, he started taking tentative steps while holding onto furniture or walls for support. The first time Marcus took 3 consecutive steps between the kitchen counter and the breakfast table, Grace had to excuse herself to compose her emotions. She had believed in his potential from the beginning, but seeing him achieve what doctors had deemed impossible was overwhelming. "Did you see that?" Marcus called to his parents, his voice filled with triumph. "I walked to the table." Diana Morrison rushed into the kitchen to find her son standing beside the breakfast table, gripping the back of a chair for support but clearly weight-bearing on his own legs. "Oh my God," Diana whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, you're standing." "I'm not just standing, Mom, I walked here. Grace saw me do it." Richard Morrison arrived to find his wife and son both crying with joy while Grace stood nearby with a smile that radiated pure satisfaction. "How is this possible?" Richard asked Dr. Reynolds when they called to report the development. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure," the therapist admitted. "Marcus has made progress that exceeds medical predictions. Sometimes patients surprise us by exceeding the limitations we've identified." But Grace knew the answer. Marcus hadn't overcome his physical condition through medical intervention alone. He had reclaimed his sense of possibility through a combination of physical training, intellectual challenge, social engagement, and most importantly, the belief that his life could be larger than his limitations. That night, as Marcus practiced standing and taking steps around his room, he looked out his bedroom window at the world beyond the Morrison mansion. For the first time in his life, that world felt accessible to him not just intellectually or emotionally, but physically as well. 6 months later, the Morrison household bore little resemblance to the carefully controlled environment Grace had first encountered. Marcus's wheelchair still sat in the corner of his room, but it was no longer his primary means of moving through the world. He walked with the aid of forearm crutches, moving with confidence through spaces that had once seemed impossible to navigate. The changes extended far beyond Marcus's mobility. The entire family had been transformed by watching him exceed every limitation that had been placed on his life. Diana Morrison had become an advocate for adaptive sports programs, serving on the board of the center where Marcus trained. Richard Morrison had established a scholarship fund for teenagers with disabilities who wanted to pursue advanced academic programs. Grace remained with the Morrison family, but her role had evolved from housekeeper to something more like a family consultant. She helped Marcus navigate the practical challenges of his increased independence while working with his parents to adjust their expectations and support systems. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd have to remind Marcus to slow down," Diana confided to Grace one morning as they watched Marcus prepare for his day. He had 3 tutoring sessions scheduled, basketball practice, and a college preparatory exam to complete. He's making up for lost time, Grace observed. 16 years of being told what he couldn't do has created a lot of motivation to prove those predictions wrong. Marcus's academic achievements had attracted attention from several universities. His combination of exceptional test scores, unique life experience, and demonstrated perseverance made him an attractive candidate for competitive programs. College recruiters who visited spoke not just about accommodations for his disability, but about the leadership potential they saw in someone who had overcome such significant challenges. The basketball team had become a source of particular pride. Marcus had progressed from beginner to starting player on the junior varsity team. His upper body strength, developed through years of wheelchair use, gave him advantages in shooting and ball handling that complemented his improved mobility. Coach Martinez wants to know if you're interested in trying out for varsity next year, Marcus told Grace after practice one afternoon. What do you think about that? Grace asked. I think a year ago I couldn't walk to the kitchen, and now coaches are asking if I want to play competitive sports. Anything seems possible. The tutoring program had also expanded Marcus's sense of purpose. His success with Jenny had led to requests for him to work with other children, facing various challenges. Parents specifically sought him out because they knew he understood struggle from personal experience. Marcus helped my daughter believe in herself again, one parent wrote in a letter to the program director. He showed her that limitations don't have to be permanent if you're willing to work and believe in change. But perhaps the most significant transformation was in Marcus's relationship with his own future. For years, his life had been organized around managing his condition and accommodating his limitations. Now he was making plans that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. I've been thinking about medical school, Marcus announced at dinner one evening. Richard Morrison nearly choked on his coffee. Medical school? I want to specialize in rehabilitation medicine. Work with kids who have been told they'll never walk, never play sports, never live independently. Diana Morrison looked at her son with amazement. The boy who had once accepted every medical limitation as permanent truth now wanted to become the doctor who would help other children exceed those same limitations. That's a challenging field, Richard said carefully. Long years of training, intense competition for admission. Dad, I learned to walk when doctors said it was impossible. I think I can handle medical school. Grace listened to this conversation with deep satisfaction. Marcus had not just recovered physical function. He had reclaimed his sense of agency over his own life. The passive patient had become an active participant in determining his future. Later that evening, Grace found Marcus in the library, reading advanced texts on neurology and rehabilitation medicine. His wheelchair sat unused nearby while he stood at a reading podium she had installed to make studying more comfortable. Any regrets about how things have changed? Grace asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. You mean, do I regret spending so many years accepting limitations instead of challenging them? Something like that. No regrets. I needed to understand what those limitations felt like before I could appreciate what it means to move beyond them, and I needed to meet someone who could see possibilities where everyone else saw problems. Grace smiled. You did all the work, Marcus. I just asked different questions. You asked the right questions. What if my body was stronger than anyone realized? What if my limitations were smaller than they appeared? What if the barriers were temporary instead of permanent? As Christmas approached, the Morrison family began planning their first vacation in years. Marcus wanted to visit college campuses and sports rehabilitation centers. Diana wanted to attend conferences on adaptive education. Richard wanted to explore opportunities to expand his scholarship program. We've become a family that travels toward possibilities instead of away from problems, Diana observed as they planned their itinerary. On Christmas morning, Marcus had a special gift for Grace. It was a framed photograph of him standing at the center court of the basketball arena, holding a trophy from a recent tournament. But the inscription made Grace's eyes fill with tears. For Grace Washington, who taught me that the only real disability is the failure to imagine a better future. Thank you for seeing who I could become before I knew it myself. Grace looked at the confident young man before her, standing tall and planning a future filled with service to others who faced similar challenges. The scared, isolated boy she had met in a wheelchair was still part of Marcus's story, but he was no longer the whole story. You know what I'm proudest of? Grace said as the family gathered around the Christmas tree. What? Marcus asked. Not that you learned to walk, though that's wonderful. I'm proudest that you learned to believe in your own possibilities. That's a skill that will serve you no matter what challenges you face. As the Morrison family celebrated together, surrounded by evidence of how dramatically their lives had changed, Grace reflected on the simple truth that had guided her from the beginning. Every person contains more potential than their current circumstances reveal. Sometimes they just need someone who believes in that potential strongly enough to help them discover it for themselves. Marcus Morrison had indeed learned to walk, but more importantly, he had learned to run toward a future he was now confident he could create.